So 1 Samuel chapter 20, how Jonathan is a true hero. Because we all love stories about heroes. Okay? And I think some of the greatest stories are those who give their lives for others. The greatest love is to lay down your life for your friends, right? But maybe a greater love is to live your life behind your friend. Like it's one thing to die and leave the task to others. It's a whole other thing when someone's much better at you than something and you're excited for them to be better than you. That's a lot harder. And this is shown in the famous Baptist preacher from London, F.B. Meyer. F.B. Meyer was a very gifted preacher in London, but who happened to be there at the same time as a man named Charles Haddon Spurgeon. And though Meyer worked very hard on his preaching, he was skilled, he was very good, he got to watch all these people in carriages go past his church to Spurgeon's church, which was overflowing by the thousands. Well, later in life, Charles Spurgeon has died, and Myers continued to preach, and then another guy comes up, G. Campbell Morgan, also incredibly famous. They were asked to speak at conferences together, and he'd watch large crowds come into the conference center to hear Morgan preach and then shuffle out when he got up. Even for a godly Christian man, jealousy's hard. We talk about this, so Saul's jealousy trapped him, and as for Christians, it can trap us too, especially if it's something we love to do. Someone's better at it than us, or someone's getting more praise than us, or no one else is doing it as we should. They're getting to do what we want to do. And so Meyer was very wise, though, because he committed himself to pray for Morgan day and night. When they were going to preach together, he got on his knees, and before he prayed for his own message, he spent twice the time praying for Meyer's message. And so people heard him later saying, "Have you heard Campbell Morgan preach? Have you heard the message this morning? Oh my, God is upon that man." Because he believed he could not be jealous of someone who he prayed for. Again, if we're honest, we all struggle with jealousy at times, but Jonathan shows us what it means to be a true hero. He puts David first. He puts his friend first, when his friend eclipses himself because God is raising him up. And ultimately, Jonathan wants what God wants. So we got to remember where we've been in this book in dealing with Jonathan. Because Jonathan doesn't appear a ton, but he is very important. In chapter 13, verse 12, we saw Jonathan first show up as, eventually we'll learn, the son of Saul. Right? And he's just an important general. And we read that 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. And Jonathan, verse 3, defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And all Israel heard it said that Saul had defeated the garrison of the Philistines. But of course, it was Jonathan who defeated them. And this event of defeating the garrison causes the Philistines to become really angry with the Israelites. They want to fight them now. And it's this event and this fight, which later in chapter 13 causes Saul to offer the unlawful sacrifice, where he wasn't supposed to. He was supposed to wait for Samuel, but he offered it in impatience. And of course, then the judgment came. At the end of chapter 13, the situation is very dire. In 22, they were horribly outgunned. On the day of battle, where there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people, was Saul and Jonathan then. But Saul and Jonathan, his son, had. So 2 swords that Saul and Jonathan have. Everyone else doesn't. And yet Jonathan heroically climbs the Michmash Pass. Remember, this is a tough guy who climbs the Michmash Pass comes in from behind, assaults the Philistines, defeats them as they get terror, and they all take off running, and his father wins the day. He should be king. From all conclusions, he is everything that Saul is not. He trusts the Lord. But according to 13:13, it's Saul's sins that prevent him from being king. In chapter 13, verse 13, Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." If you think about it, this is kind of frustrating. Could you imagine if you do not get what you are really good at because of someone else's sin? It's not even your fault. You don't get to have the respect. You don't get the attaboys for being the best cleaner in the church, or the best chair setter upper, or having the opportunities to preach or to disciple, or the work position because of someone else's sins. Like the idea of, in a boss in a workplace gives the job to his son rather than the most qualified person, which is you. So in this case, Saul's sin is causing Jonathan to never have the opportunity to be king. And yet that doesn't cause resentment in him. And we can assume in chapter 17 that he is there with Goliath, like everyone else, shaking in their boots, all of Israel, having lost his bold faith. But in chapter 18, 1 through 4, he sees David. He loved David, because in David, he saw someone who had the same love he did, a love for God. He saw the love for God and the faith in God. And so remember, we talked about how Jonathan's actually old enough to be David's father. So most of the pictures that we draw, images we have, is not true. And he sees a man who loves the Lord just like he does. They make a covenant promise together. In verse 3, Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, and he gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. He put his royal clothes on a shepherd boy, because he knew this man had the Lord with him. Now today, we're going to see then how Jonathan acts as the hero to support the true king David no matter what. This is so big because, again, the whole point of 1 Samuel is trying to show that David should be king, that Israel needs a king like David. And here, the hero Jonathan is going to support David. And we're going to learn what it means to support someone else, too. So the story starts off at the beginning. And this is, the progress of the story. In chapter 18, chapter 20, chapter 20, verse 1, the beginning of the story sets up these two guys and their need again. Remember, David has just run. He's run from his home, and he's running to help. He fled from Ramah, where Samuel was, because he was at his home and his wife let him out the window so he could run away and not be killed by Saul's guards. But he ran to the one person who he thought could help him, Samuel, because Saul would never go after God's prophet and tell him to hand David over. He would not question the prophets, and yet Saul shows that he doesn't care about anyone anymore and tries to capture David from the midst of the prophets. And it is only the Holy Spirit overcoming him that prevents David from being captured. And so now, David runs back south to the one place that is probably the most dangerous, because this is where Saul's capital is, Gibeah, but it's also where his one friend that he trusts with his own life is. Jonathan. And clearly, David is afraid. Look in your Bibles at verse 1. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt and what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life?" Remember, this is the same man who said to the giant Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, verse 45, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled." He was totally brave then. Now he's horribly afraid and wondering what he could have possibly done wrong to deserve this treatment. This kind of goes to show you, maybe you guys have experienced this. It's one thing to get pressure from the world. It's usually a lot harder to face it when it comes from God's people. Right? David had no trouble fighting this giant who was clearly fighting the people of God. But when people in the church fight us and backbite us and cause us to have fear, the ones who are supposed to love God are against us, that hurts all the more. That probably causes terror and concern all the more, because not only does it cause you worry about what they're saying, but also, have I done something wrong? Is it me? I thought I was doing what's right. And so humbly, David asks what he's done wrong and why Saul is trying to kill him. And this causes a disagreement between the two of them, because Jonathan and David then disagree about the king. Verses 1, 2 through 3. And he, being Jonathan, said to him, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Remember 19, verse 1? Saul spoke to Jonathan and his son and all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. So Saul had also been very clear with Jonathan in the past, saying, "You know what? I want David killed." Logically, Jonathan assumes, just like he had a fit of rage back then, that if it was coming up again, he would talk to his son about it. He still loves his father. He still serves his father. Some say maybe he's just being naive. I don't know. Text isn't clear. But David comes to Jonathan and says, "But Jonathan, don't you know your father knows that you like me, that we're friends, that you support me? He is not going to tell you this." You can feel the emotion in his language as he says, "There is but a step between me and death." Right? Just a step. I'm about to trip into it. Pastor Richard Phillips says, "We get a sense that David has allowed his thoughts to dwell on the injustice of his situation and the temporal threat posed by King Saul, forgetting the reality of sin in the world as a sufficient explanation for injustice, and no longer remembering God's sovereign care over his life." And it's a sense that David is forgetting what God is doing. And so the two of them discuss, and they come up with a plan that is worthy of a hero. A plan worthy of a hero is conceived. Verses 4 through 11. Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at table with the king. But let me go, that I might hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says, good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore, deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. For why should you bring me to your father? And Jonathan said, far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? Jonathan said to David, come, let us go into the field. So they both went out into the field. Jonathan, probably in response to David's desperation, because David is probably seeming very desperate at the moment. Maybe Jonathan believes him. Probably not yet. That's why this test is going to occur. Jonathan just says, okay then, what can I do for you? Like, what do you want me to do? I'll do it. I love you, man. What can I help with? So David gives his idea. It's like, hey, tomorrow is the new moon. If you remember, Israel ran on a lunar calendar. So they didn't go by 30 days. They just looked at the moon, and it changed. But when the moon was new, it was the start of a new month. Makes sense. And so at the beginning of each month, the Israelites were commanded to celebrate a festival. They would have a big celebration. Numbers 28, verse 11 says, at the beginnings of your months, you shall offer a burnt offering to the Lord. 2 bulls from the herd, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, a year old without blemish. That's a lot of sacrifices, okay? There's a bunch have to be offered all at once. Or Numbers 10, verse 10 says, on the day of your gladness, also on your appointed feasts, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpet over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings. They shall be a reminder of you before your Lord. I am the Lord, your God. Numbers 10, verse 10. So every month, they were supposed to remember God. And as the king's son-in-law, David would be expected to show up at the celebration thanking God. And a test then would be given. David was very wise. You can tell where Solomon gets all his wisdom from. He's very wise, and he's like, okay, let's do a test. We're going to determine if I'm on Saul's hit list or not. So, if he responds positively to me being absent and he's understanding, then I'm in good graces with him because it's a good excuse. If he gets angry, you know something's up because he shouldn't be angry about this. And then David asks, says, please, Jonathan, if I've done anything wrong, if you find proof of me doing evil, kill me yourself rather than turn me over to your father who is so angry. We made a covenant promise together. Again, the desperation in David. He is afraid of Saul at this point. And so, verse 9, Jonathan basically responds, of course I'll tell you. I would tell you if I knew. And in verse 10, David, probably in fear again, asks for specifics. How are you going to tell me? How am I going to know? And this back and forth, I don't know if you've noticed, like each verse is like another person speaking. They're dialoguing back and forth. It shows the tension that's building. This is fear, concern. And so back in verse 11, Jonathan said, come, let us go out into a field. And they both went out into the field. He's like, all right, let's calm down. You know what, let's go over here and I'll show you what will happen. This would put a lot on Jonathan. Right? This plan that David has brought up seems good, but it would put a lot on David because Jonathan has to face his father, has to make an excuse for David, but Jonathan also has to lie. Right? So is David asking Jonathan to sin? Now, this is very different from God telling Samuel to not reveal the whole story in chapter 16. You remember that? We talked about how God told Samuel. Samuel was like, hey, if I go and anoint this new king, Saul's going to kill me. And so God tells him, if anyone asks, you're going to offer a sacrifice. And he did offer that sacrifice. He just wouldn't tell anyone that while he was offering the sacrifice, he was also anointing the new king. So it was kind of giving the truth, but not necessarily telling him everything about the truth. But this isn't that. This is actually a complete lie, because Jonathan would be telling his father, David's in Bethlehem, when he really knows he's outside the city hiding. And Exodus 20, verse 16 says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Right? So here's the thing. It says bear false witness. And the idea of a witness, of course, would be used in a trial. Someone's put under oath, say, you must tell the truth, speak the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. They didn't say that back then, but it's that idea. That basically, if you're in court, you have to say the total truth. Jonathan's not going to be in court. And remember, right now, this isn't the narrator speaking. This is David speaking. And David is probably really afraid. This plan might be a good plan, but there's no indication that it's God's plan. Like, God is not telling Jonathan to lie. David is. And lest we think for a second, maybe I could get away with lying in a moment. Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 34, I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Matthew 5, 34 through 37. There was a common Israelite understanding that basically said, I don't have to really mean it or really tell the truth unless I say I swear by the temple or the gold on the temple, the specifics. Then I have to tell the truth. Jesus is saying, no. Don't lie. Don't mistell the truth. Let your words simply be true, no matter what. Say you're going to do it. Don't say you're going to do it. Be true. So Jesus raises the standard even beyond what the law specifically said. So I don't think that Samuel's example is prohibited in that, someone who kept part of the truth away. But Jesus tells us to always speak the truth. So again, notice the tension rising back and forth between these two men as they're concerned, as they're worried. And it's a dire moment for David and Jonathan because they have a lot to lose, right? David obviously has his life to lose, but Jonathan has the risk of losing respect for his father, losing his close friend, losing his reputation. But tough situations like this, they give opportunity for faith. This is getting more challenging. The tension is rising. But as I said again, tough situations give opportunity to show faith. This is an opportunity, even as the story shows the tension rising, that they can show that they believe God. Guys, remember God ordains our trials, right? The difficult things you go through, whether at work or with family, with friends, God is helping us grow as he tests our faith, to become those who trust God more. We can't see this enough in Scripture, that we cannot despair at trials, but they're opportunities for God's glory. So then, Jonathan does the ultimate act of heroism, humility. The ultimate act of heroism is Jonathan's humility. Now, I'd say I used to think that the peak of this story, the most intense part, was when he faced Saul, because Saul throws a spear at him, and that's like the most intense action, right? Like, come on, what's the part of the movie you want to see? But when it gets peak and the music gets loud and the action's occurring, but actually, I read some commentaries and doing things, and they actually convinced me that really right here is the climax of the story. His humility that he was about to show is the most heroic thing that he does. Let me walk through this. So, Jonathan, makes it all about David. He turns around the situation and he makes it all about David, starting in verses 12 through 17. Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. What I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me your steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. God, the Lord God Yahweh, was the center of their relationship. That's what brought them together. And so he promises, based on Yahweh's name, that whatever he learns, he is going to tell David, because they are friends about God. And then he makes a very interesting statement after he makes this promise to tell David everything. Look in verse 14. He says, "If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die." Again, he's just talking about how his father might want to kill David. And if his father wants to kill David, he says, "Show me kindness so I don't die." Why is that? Because he's the son of the king. And look in the next, what does he say right afterwards? He says at the end of verse 15, "When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." Jonathan knows well that David's going to be king. He knows it. That's why he gave him his armor. Later on, he just says clearly, "You're going to be king." He says that God is going to be with David as he was with Saul. And so who are the enemies of the king? But the former prince and his descendants. Usually, when a new king comes on the throne, what do they do with the people who were the previous inheritors of the throne? Take them out, because they're competitors. The descendants of the old king are competitors for the throne, and so they kill them. And so verse 16 and 17 here, Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, the family of David. William Blakey, writing on this, says, has seldom, if ever, exhibited a finer instant of triumphant faith than when the prince, with all the resources of his kingdom at his beck, made this request of a helpless outlaw." You get that? What he's doing? He is asking David to spare the king's life, to spare the prince his life, because he believes that Yahweh is going to make David king. Like, that's crazy. He has all the authority of Israel, and he's like, "David, don't kill me." Pastor Tim Chester, writing on this, says, "Here is a wonderful irony. By giving up the future of his house, Jonathan gains its future under the protection of David. David promises to preserve the house of Jonathan, and as the book of 2 Samuel recounts, that is what happens. The only person who survives of Saul's line is Jonathan's son, because of this promise. He, by admitting his weakness, by giving his kingdom up, actually secures his family's future." Guys, like David and Jonathan's relationship here, we have to give up our pretend rights to reign. We ultimately have to trust David's descendant, Jesus. We have to bind our future to his. We have to give up control to him. We have to be like John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist, who had crowds following him, who was religiously the top notch, who all the religious establishment were even looking at him and going, who is this guy? Wow, why is he drawing such crowds? And when Jesus came in John 3, verse 30, speaking of his younger cousin, he said, he must become greater, I must become less. And yet, by giving up, we gain a future under the protection of Jesus. Remember Mark 8:34? Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Right now, Saul is working so hard to cling onto his throne and his rights, his power. Jonathan is giving it away. Think about where in your life you might want to hold on to your pretend control. You're like, no, but I got this. I really have to hold on to this because I really want to be king in this situation. And let it go to Jesus, doing what he says instead. Jonathan, then finishing this conversation, entrusting himself to David, plans on how to help David. Verses 18 through 23. Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was at hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shoot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them. Then you are to come. For as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. He explains to David his plan. He's like, okay, how am I going to let you know? David wants to know how Jonathan's going to let him know. So Jonathan says, you go, after 3 days, hide by this special rock. It's our little meeting place. And I'm going to have a secret arrangement. So you look for the sign. If I say that I'm going to shoot some arrows off right next to it, and if I say the secret message, which is, hey, no, actually the arrows are over here. Come back a little bit. Oh, no, he's safe. He can come back. If he lies to the boy and says, oh, no, keep going. The arrows are beyond you. That's his signal that David should run. And he finishes, though, with a very theological statement, right? He says, in verse 22, for the Lord has sent you away. Not Saul is after you, not you better run or you're going to die. He knows Yahweh is in control. He doesn't want David to leave. This is his friend. But David must know, just like Joseph, right? In Genesis chapter 45, verse 7, Joseph, who was separated from his family, and yet he said that God sent him to preserve life. Just the same way his brothers did evil and sent him to Egypt, so Saul is doing evil. He's going to send, or David is going to be sent by Yahweh. This is the foundation of it. In a moment, we're going to find out what Jonathan does and how he stands up. But he only stands up because he has already proven himself to be humble. He's already trusted God. So we see then the climax of the story here. This is the climax. This is the point where it reaches his humility. He trusts God. And then everything else is going to be the sliding down part. This is the result of that. It's much like we would say, we know this. The cross is the climax, because in Jesus' humbling moment, you're not dead. He died for you. And so, in the same way, Jonathan's humbling moment leads him to have the bravery to act later. So Jonathan stands as the result of his humility. The story begins in verse 24. David hides, Jonathan conceals. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked to leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason, he has not come to the king's table. David goes out, hides in the field, waits as the new moon celebration begins. It's party time! Chinese New Year, other celebrations. The people then gather at a banquet, much like all would do in ancient times, for great festivities. And Saul is in his normal seat, which is against a wall, probably for defensive purposes. You can't be snuck up from behind if you're against a wall. The king being there. And he sits there and look around. Saul's uncle Abner is there, who is the general. Everyone's important, is present, but there's one guy missing. David. And Saul notices David's absence. He's like, where's David? David, he thinks, must be unclean, which actually shows very highly of David, right? He's basically thinking, oh, David must be obeying the commands of the Torah. Because in Leviticus chapter 7, verse 20, there was a command to not go to the festivals if you were unclean. And you could become unclean by all kinds of things, right? If you accidentally came upon a dead person, you were unclean. Even if you touched a forbidden insect. So if you're laying there on the side of the road, like you're sitting down on the side of the road, and a forbidden insect, like a grasshopper, walks up and jumps on you, you're unclean. You can't go to the festival. And a lot of people would just be like, okay, fine, I'm just going to move on. It's party time. I can't miss the party. David, Saul knows, is a righteous man. And he is going to follow God's law no matter what. But then the second day comes. The holy day is over. David should be able to be there, even if he was unclean, but he's not. So in verse 27, he asks Jonathan, where is the son of Jesse? Okay, remember, David is the hero of Israel, the commander of armies, and Saul's son-in-law. And he calls him the son of that nobody Jesse, kind of deriding him. Jonathan then answers him, concealing the truth, saying, oh, he was called back to Bethlehem by his brother, because his brother is now the head of the family, and there's a yearly sacrifice there. David had to run to these family obligations. And you guys know, like, if there's one excuse that we always get away with, it's family. It probably shouldn't be. Sometimes it's too much. But, you know, if you were counting on somebody to be there, and you're like, hey, we're going to go see this movie together, and you get there, and they're not there, and you're like, what's going on? Why are they? And you finally call them, and you're like, hey, where are you? Oh, I'm so sorry. I had a family emergency. You're like, okay, I get it. That's fine. Okay, family emergencies matter. I understand. Like, we give to that. So in the same way, David had responsibilities towards his family, so that was an understandable thing. Or at least it should have been okay. But the truth is quickly revealed. Saul shows his true colors as he strikes and Jonathan stands. Look at how Saul responds in verse 30. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Saul becomes instantly angry, furious, and he assaults Jonathan with 3 persuasive tools. He's trying to convince Jonathan to betray David and turn him over to Saul. And notice the first one he addresses is shame. He tries to get him with shame. It's like, you've betrayed your family. You are bringing about personal shame. And he insults his mother, basically calling names, and every English translation kind of softens, because this is bad. He's basically saying he's acting like the child of a harlot, if you were to use much stronger words than harlot. And he should feel ashamed. He should feel ashamed that he's acting in such a way. Then he brings out guilt, which it doesn't even make sense, right? He's like, you're going to bring shame on your mother, who's a harlot, right? So Saul has just insulted his mother, and he's telling Jonathan that he will insult his mother if he goes with David. Again, it doesn't make sense. But he's saying, if you choose David, you are betraying your family. Okay? Feel that guilt, right? It's a guilt trip. And then third, he appeals to his greed, saying, as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. You should be ashamed of yourself. How dare you turn your family? You should feel guilty. And don't you want to be king? He's in your way. Some of you know this temptation very well, right? You know what it's like to have family who pressure you against following Christ? Michelle was a girl who had an atheist father. She was very upset when she became a Christian, saying she was throwing her life away. How could she follow that religious mumbo-jumbo? He put pressure on her, constantly telling her how foolish it was. Don't you know? Don't you know that religion died out a couple centuries ago? Religion is a tool of the weak-minded to make them feel comfortable when they cannot explain things. Don't you know how foolish is that? You're smarter than that. Or she was getting married, and she was talking to her father about how she wanted to submit to her husband, and she could have told her father she wanted to go move into the middle of an Ebola-infested area. It was like, how could you do that? Or that she wanted to go and kill someone. It was just utterly ridiculous. And so he brought things like, you can't be my child. Who are you? Jesus said that he would divide parents against child, right? We must believe like Jonathan did, that following God would be so much better than even listening to our loved ones. Jonathan, in the midst of all that pressure, the father he loved, his king, bringing these weapons against him, he doesn't give in. And so he says in verse 32, Jonathan answered Saul, his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Remember last week we saw that Michael was lying about David and trying to feed into it. Jonathan stands up for David. He's innocent. And so Saul in verse 33 hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. Remember John 15:20, where Jesus said, "A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you." Jonathan has sided with David. And so now Jonathan is going to be treated like David. And so just like Saul tried to throw a spear and kill David, now he's trying to throw a spear and kill his own heir. His anger and his jealousy has caused so much folly and pain. But notice how Jonathan responds. Verse 34. Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him. Talk about a selflessness. He just had a spear thrown at him. His own father threw a spear to kill him. And why is he angry? Because his father had disgraced David. His father had disgraced God's chosen man. So the question must come down to this, guys. Am I like Saul or am I like Jonathan? Are we determined to try and cling to power, to be in charge in our life, or are we going to trust the one who's already in power? Saul's clinging is causing him to do foolish things to his own family. Jonathan is trusting God and his choice of David. His humility has been shown. The consequences of that humility has made a split between him and his father, and the story comes to an end with the epilogue. Jonathan and David say goodbye. The story finishes off with them coming together. Jonathan carefully signals, verses 35 through 39. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field, the appointment with David, with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." And as the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called out after the boy, "Is the arrow not beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. The hero has stood up for what is right, and now he goes to let David know. The plan to protect David in case that Jonathan was being followed, because again, he just ticked off his father. His father knows this. He just secretly goes out to a place he often shoots. He shoots off an arrow like he's having target practice. He has his little boy go and get it. And the boy runs off, having no idea what just happened. Jonathan then shows his loving concern for David. Verse 40, as he gave his weapon to his boy and said, "Go," and carried him to the city. And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. They kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. We previously talked about here, this love that they share is not unmasculine. It's nothing to do with homosexuality. It's just 2 brothers in arms caring for one another, which was common throughout history. They expressed their love, their sadness as they were about to depart from one another. And he ends in verse 42, reminding David of blessing. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever." And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went to the city. Peace? Go in peace? David is now on the run for his life as the king of Israel is going to hunt him down. Jonathan will forever be at odds with his father because now his father knows that he is supporting David, and Jonathan's going to know that Saul is trying to kill David, and Jonathan will not be included in any more of his plans for the rest of his life. But both men, he said, have sworn of us in the name of the Lord. The Lord Yahweh will be between them. In the midst of a great conflict with Saul, they have peace with each other. as Jesus said in John 14, verse 27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." We got to remember, Jonathan is a hero, right? Jonathan is a true hero. Not a hero who gets the girl and wins the battle. He's the humble hero who rejoices at his friend's wedding. I don't know if you guys have been able to be part of a wedding of a really good friend. It's a great, and it's so fun because actually the groomsmen's original responsibility when the concept was brought up was they were there to defend the groom from any other suitors who would try and take the wife. Because they're like, all right. And so they were there, and they were supposed to come armed, ready to defend him because they wanted to see this wedding happen. They were excited for this wedding. And having been part of those weddings, there's just something so great when you look at your friend's face when he sees his bride coming down. You're like, yes, I am so happy for you. Jonathan is the humble hero. Jonathan is like John the Baptist, who is so much in joy when Jesus was ascending, because Jesus was what it was all about. And we must be this way too. When someone is doing better than you, it is heroic to cheer them on. When someone is better known than you, or loved more than you, when you're not being recognized and someone else's, when your ministry in the church is being ignored and someone else's ministry is being uplifted, you need to clap for them. I need to clap for them. But it's sometimes hard, isn't it? We want to be noticed. We want to be recognized. And remember how F.B. Meyer started that desire to clap. He began praying for those he was jealous of. He loved those he was jealous of. So the way that you fight that jealousy is see the reasons that we love Jesus. Remind yourself of the gospel, why Jesus has loved you. That you don't deserve the love that you have. You deserve only hell and death. And yet Jesus died for you when you were his enemy. Jesus is worthy of your praise. And so if someone else is making Jesus look good, you're going to rejoice over that. Pray that you would rejoice over that. So then you won't be jealous. You'll be too filled with joy. Replace jealousy with prayer. Replace pride with humility. Pray with me. We ask the Lord to do that. Oh Lord, enable us to love you and trust your work in others. May we trust you to care for us, Lord, when we are lowly. May we trust your name to be proclaimed. Not fighting for our privilege or our renown, for us being praised, but may we fight for you to be praised. May we say, you increase, we decrease. Pray, Lord, even as we struggle at times with not being recognized for things. May you enable our hearts to pray for those people who are. May we rejoice at their success. Lord, may we trust you. The praise of your glorious name, O good God. Amen.